I knew something was dead wrong when Howard Banks from HR knocked on my office door and said, "Hey, Garrison, you forgot to sign the new compliance update." I never forget paperwork. That's why Vector Dynamics Defense Operations had maintained 99.8% contract compliance since I restructured the quality protocols, instead of the regulatory nightmares they used to face every quarter before I got my hands on the systems. My name is Garrison Reed. I'm 54 years old and I've been keeping this place mission ready for 26 years. Still, I signed the paper, handed it back, and went right back to monitoring the Lighthouse Defense Systems integration for the $150 million joint contract. The deal they kept announcing at every all-hands meeting like it was Christmas morning, but nobody actually understood how our legacy systems would interface with their modern platforms. They just knew it meant bigger bonuses for management and probably downsizing for half the operations staff. 26 years, that's how long I'd been at Vector Dynamics. Not in the spotlight, not getting mentioned in the quarterly investor calls. I was the guy who crawled through server rooms at 2 a.m. when network security protocols failed, who rebuilt operational frameworks when compliance audits threatened contract renewals, who kept decades-old defense systems talking to cutting-edge equipment with custom integration modules I designed in my garage workshop on weekends. You know, the critical stuff, the boring stuff, the stuff they don't notice until it breaks and costs them $200,000 in contract penalties. That morning, I had 3 screens showing system diagnostics, a half-empty coffee mug going cold, and a maintenance log that said check backup authentication servers, Bay 12 circled in red ink. Behind me, the operations floor hummed with its usual controlled activity. Network traffic flowing at optimal bandwidth, server farms maintaining their programmed load balancing, backup systems cycling through scheduled diagnostics every 15 minutes. And buried in all that electronic coordination was the steady digital heartbeat of the security protocols I'd spent 2 decades fine-tuning. In the middle of monitoring everything, I sat alone in my corner office reviewing the integration specifications for Lighthouse's quantum encrypted systems. My clearance authorization sat right there in the federal documentation. Senior Operations Director, Level 3 Security Clearance, Systems Integration Specialist. I was the bridge between our battle-tested infrastructure and Lighthouse's next-generation platforms that still had bugs their programmers couldn't identify. No one else in the company had that certification. The training alone took 2 years and cost the company $75,000. You had to understand both legacy military protocols and emerging cybersecurity frameworks, plus federal defense regulations that most people couldn't even pronounce correctly. They gave me the responsibility, then forgot I existed. I didn't mind working in the background. There's satisfaction in it. You get to build things properly while the executive team argues about market positioning and revenue projections in conference rooms with catered meals. I wasn't looking for corner offices or executive parking spots. I just wanted my systems secure, my documentation accurate, and my coffee uninterrupted, so I could do the job right. The only people who really knew what I did were the ones smart enough to understand how fragile the whole operation was. Vincent Torres at Lighthouse Defense Systems, who'd been running integrated platforms since before the internet existed. My old mentor, Raymond Foster, before he retired to his cabin in Montana. The DoD inspector who certified our security protocols and always asked to see my compliance logs first. Everyone else saw me as just Garrison from operations. Middle-aged, quiet grease under his fingernails from weekend repairs, the guy who fixed things when they broke but didn't contribute to the big picture. Then Oliver Martinez showed up to optimize everything that was working perfectly. That Wednesday started like any other until the email hit at 9:30 a.m. All personnel mandatory meeting 10:30 sharp, strategic transformation, plus organizational restructuring. Attendance required. That's corporate speak for heads are rolling, and someone new is holding the axe. Enter Oliver Martinez, new CEO. Mid-30s Stanford MBA, wearing a suit that cost more than my mortgage payment. He had that tech startup energy you see in business podcasts. The kind of guy who thinks disruption is a business strategy and calls spreadsheets data-driven solutions with a straight face. He smiled too much, talked too fast, called himself a digital transformation architect. I knew we were all outdated components in his efficiency algorithm from Minute One. He spoke for 50 minutes straight, dropping buzzwords like agile methodology, legacy system optimization, and human capital streamlining. People around me nodded like he was revealing the secrets of the universe. I just sipped my burnt coffee and watched a security alert on server bank 7 that would trigger an automatic lockdown if someone didn't update the authentication protocols in the next hour. Nobody else was monitoring it. They were too busy being inspired by innovation. I reached over and made the update remotely, saving them about $80,000 in contract compliance violations. Oliver kept talking about eliminating redundant workforce infrastructure and modernizing legacy operational frameworks. I wondered if he'd consider a complete system shutdown redundant or modern. 3 hours later, Howard knocked again. This time, he brought backup. 2 people from corporate I'd never seen before. One with a tablet, one with lifeless eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses that probably cost more than I made in a month. Garrison, can we talk privately? Translation: bend over and prepare for impact. They led me into a conference room like I was carrying something contagious. No water offered, no small talk, no "How's Patricia?" Just a manila folder slid across the fake wood table like a termination notice with my name on it. Oliver didn't bother showing up for the execution. The letter inside was half buzzwords, half legal protection. Position no longer aligned with strategic vision. Operational restructuring requires different skill sets. Digital transformation initiatives effective immediately. Legacy personnel transition complete. I was still reading the corporate doublespeak when Tablet Guy said, "You'll need to return your access cards and security credentials before 3 p.m. today." The other one added, "Security's been notified of your departure timeline." I stood up, walked toward the door, then stopped. Something caught my eye through the conference room window. At the reception desk, where they kept visitor badges and company announcements, someone had printed a security alert with my employee photo. Scrawled across the bottom in red marker, "No RE entry clearance revoked." Not former employee, not garrison, not even retired personnel. Just clearance revoked, taped to laminate like I was some kind of operational security threat. It hit me like a wrench to the chest. I'd trained their last 3 operations managers when they got promoted. I'd kept their biggest defense contract alive through 2 major cyber attacks and that power grid failure in 2021 that knocked out half of Ohio's industrial sector. I'd missed Michelle's college graduation to babysit a server migration that saved them $500,000 in federal penalties. And now I was being treated like a security risk in a polo shirt. I didn't argue. That would have been giving them entertainment they didn't deserve. I took a breath, walked back to my workstation, and started packing my personal items into the briefcase I'd carried for 18 years. My Navy Challenge coin, the one Patricia bought me for our anniversary. Digital diagnostic tools that could troubleshoot problems other people couldn't even identify. Security protocols manual, custom network configurations I'd programmed myself. Everything that made me more than just another operations guy. The floor had gone quiet. Not equipment quiet. The systems kept running, but people quiet. Word travels fast in a defense contractor office. Everyone knew what that manila folder meant. And they were all wondering who was next on Oliver's optimization list. My assistant Casey walked over pretending to check a work order. Kid was 25, fresh out of systems administration school, eager to learn everything I could teach him about keeping defense networks secure. "This is insane," he whispered. "You're the only one who understands half these protocols." I nodded toward the security monitors, authentication servers showing amber alerts on Bay 12. Backup systems going to fail security validation in about 30 minutes. You'll need to reset the clearance parameters. I don't know how to do that. Now you'll learn. Casey looked like someone had just told him he'd have to perform surgery with a screwdriver. "Garrison, what if I can't figure it out?" I closed my briefcase and adjusted my watch band, a habit I'd developed over the years. Whenever I was thinking through a complex problem, I'd check my watch timing. Tomorrow, when their security systems went dark and federal inspectors started asking questions, the screaming would start. Then the system locks down, operations stop, and somebody upstairs learns what I actually do around here. I walked toward the exit, past workstations where people avoided eye contact like unemployment was contagious. Past the break room where I'd eaten lunch alone most days for 26 years. Past the operations center where I'd documented every upgrade, every security patch, every late-night emergency call that kept this place federally compliant. Howard was waiting by the security door with his hand out, badge and access cards. I handed them over. No speech, no threats, no "you'll regret this." Just the quiet beep of magnetic strips being deactivated like canceling a subscription that's about to expire. "Sorry about this, Garrison," Howard mumbled. He'd been doing HR for 12 years, long enough to know when management was making a mistake they'd pay for later. "Not your call," I said. and walked through the door I'd been using since Bill Clinton was president. Outside in the parking lot, I sat in my truck and pulled out my phone. The Secure Operations app was still active. They'd forgotten to disable my remote access. I scrolled to the authentication management system and found what I was looking for. Bay 12 backup servers, the redundant system that kept operations running when the main security grid experienced the cyber attacks that hit defense contractors every summer when foreign hackers ramped up their activities. It was a complex system, not just servers, but a network of encrypted protocols, validation sequences, and automated responses that had to coordinate perfectly to prevent unauthorized access from damaging classified information. I designed the authentication system myself after the 2019 breach that shut down operations for 5 days. It took me 8 months to engineer, another 4 months to implement, and 3 years to fine-tune the security algorithms. The system was so sophisticated that it required manual override codes to prevent unauthorized changes, codes that only I knew. I disabled the backup authentication with a few keystrokes. Not damaged, not broken, just offline. The system would show green lights and normal status to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. But when the next security validation cycle ran tomorrow morning, the backup wouldn't authenticate. 6 operation centers would lock down simultaneously, and the restart sequence would take a minimum of 8 hours. With Lighthouse Defense Systems security teams scheduled to conduct their final compliance inspection tomorrow afternoon, any operational delays would trigger the breach of contract clauses that could kill the $150 million deal. I didn't smile. I didn't feel vindicated. I just started the truck and drove home with steady hands and clear thinking because they thought they were modernizing operations, but they just fired the guy who understood how everything connected. The house felt strange when I got home at 3:15 in the afternoon. Patricia wouldn't be back from her volunteer work until 600, and Michelle was in Columbus finishing her MBA. Probably in some lecture hall learning things that would help her avoid the kind of career that ends with a manila folder and a security alert. No system notifications pinging my phone. No emergency calls from supervisors who'd found something broken that needed immediate attention. No, hey Garrison, quick question, followed by 4 hours of unpaid troubleshooting. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the kitchen clock marking time I wasn't getting paid for anymore. My briefcase sat on the dining table like a closed case file. Everything I'd accumulated over 2 decades of solving other people's problems. Company property technically, except for the personal documentation I'd kept with my own resources to do jobs the company systems couldn't handle. I walked to the basement workshop, past the holiday decorations Patricia hadn't put away yet, behind the water heater that I had replaced myself when the old one died 4 winters ago. In the corner was a filing cabinet I'd bought at a government surplus auction when we first bought the house. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a folder labeled Vector Systems Documentation, Personal Backup. I'd started keeping these records 12 years ago, not because I was paranoid, but because I'd watched too many companies lose critical operational knowledge when experienced people left or retired. The folder was thick, hand-drawn network diagrams, security protocol flowcharts with my annotations in the margins, custom interface specifications for equipment that wasn't supposed to integrate, but somehow did thanks to protocols I'd built in this very workshop. Integration procedures for every piece of equipment on that operations floor documented in my neat engineer's handwriting because I knew someday the institutional knowledge would walk out the door. I just didn't think it would be me getting pushed out. I flipped to the section marked Authentication Systems, Critical Backup Protocols. There it was. Bay 12 Server Authentication. Complete schematics, manual override procedures, restoration protocols, diagnostic troubleshooting steps that would take someone else months to figure out through trial and error. The authentication system wasn't just backup servers. It was the central nervous system that kept operations stable during the cyber attacks that hit defense contractors every time international tension spiked. Without it, any security threat would cascade through the network like dominoes falling, locking down 6 operation centers simultaneously. The restoration sequence alone would take 8 hours minimum, assuming someone knew the correct authentication codes to prevent permanent data corruption. With Lighthouse's security team doing their final compliance inspection tomorrow afternoon, any operational delays would void the delivery schedule built into the joint contract. I sat down slowly in my workshop chair, the operations documentation heavy in my hands. Pages and pages of technical details that represented years of learning how defense systems actually worked. not how they were supposed to work according to the manuals. I hadn't told anyone about the authentication system's critical nature because nobody had ever asked. They just handed me problems and expected solutions without understanding the complexity of keeping 20-year-old classified systems running alongside modern encrypted networks. They saw me adjust a few settings on a computer screen and assumed it was simple. They didn't see the months of research, the late nights studying network diagrams, the weekends spent in electronic surplus stores looking for obsolete components that weren't manufactured anymore. Well, not anymore. I wasn't angry. That part of me had gone cold in the HR conference room when I saw my photo posted like a wanted poster. This wasn't emotion. This was operational, cause and effect, as predictable as a server failing when current exceeded rated capacity. They hadn't just fired me. They'd removed the person who understood how everything connected, and they had no idea what was coming next. Somewhere across town, Oliver was probably in his office right now updating spreadsheets and calculating the salary savings from eliminating legacy personnel, maybe planning the celebration dinner for closing the Lighthouse deal. I pulled out my personal laptop from the workshop bench and opened the diagnostic logs I kept as backup documentation. System performance records going back 12 years, maintenance schedules, critical component registries, failure analysis reports, everything they'd need to maintain the systems I'd built and rebuilt and fine-tune over 2 decades. Everything they'd never thought to ask for before they showed me the door. I checked the authentication logs one more time. Bay 12 servers showed offline status. Timestamp 3:47 p.m. Manual intervention required for restoration. Override codes needed. They had no idea yet, but tomorrow afternoon when Lighthouse's executives walked through that facility, expecting to see secure, reliable operations, they'd learn what happened when you fired the guy who kept the systems running. I closed the laptop and adjusted my watch band, checking the time out of habit. Tomorrow, when their operations centers went dark and silent, the screaming would start. The first call came at 6:23 a.m. Thursday morning. I was in the kitchen making coffee, watching the sunrise through the window when my phone started buzzing on the counter. Unknown number. I let it ring. Then again at 6:25. This time, I recognized Oliver Martinez's direct line from the caller ID. I watched it ring 6 times and go to voicemail. His voice sounded tight, like someone trying to stay calm while his house burned down. Garrison, we're experiencing some technical difficulties this morning, and I was hoping you could provide guidance on system restoration procedures. Nothing major, just need to clarify a few operational details. Please call me back as soon as possible. I played it twice, then deleted it. Technical difficulties. That's what they called it when their entire operations infrastructure locked down at 5:30 a.m. during the security validation cycle that ran every morning when the system verified clearance protocols. By 7 a.m., 4 more voicemails had stacked up. The facility manager sounding panicked, the IT supervisor trying to stay professional while clearly out of his depth, even Vincent Torres from Lighthouse Defense Systems wondering why his scheduled compliance inspection had been postponed indefinitely. I made my coffee and sat at the kitchen table, listening to the messages pile up like evidence in a case I'd already won. Somewhere across town, technical crews were probably crawling through server rooms right now, trying to figure out why their authentication systems weren't responding, looking for the magic codes that would bring 6 operation centers back online before Lighthouse's executives decided this wasn't the reliable partner they wanted for a $150 million defense contract. Patricia came downstairs at 7:45, already dressed for her volunteer shift at the community center. Rough morning? She asked, glancing at my phone, buzzing with another incoming call. Could say that. They're discovering what I actually did for a living. She'd been married to an operations director long enough to understand the unspoken rules of defense systems. Sometimes equipment failed. Sometimes the failure happened at exactly the wrong moment. And sometimes the only person who could fix it was the person you just treated, like yesterday's newspaper. Casey sent me a text at 8:30. Everything's locked down. They're freaking out. Oliver keeps asking where you documented the override procedures. Nobody knows how to restore anything. Can you help? I didn't respond immediately. Let them understand what 26 years of experience actually looked like when it walked out the door. At 9:30 a.m., my phone rang again. This time, it was Casey calling directly. Garrison, please. They're offering double overtime if you'll come in and help restore the systems. The Lighthouse deal is falling apart. Oliver's in full panic mode. Howard's saying maybe your termination was hasty. I turned the phone face down on the table and went back to my coffee. By noon, Patricia came home from the community center. She found me in the garage organizing my personal tool collection and separating it from anything that belonged to Vector. Productive morning? She asked, leaning against the doorframe. Could say that. Got fired yesterday. Decided to do some organizing today. She'd been married to an engineer long enough to understand cause and effect, and their systems just happened to break down the day after they let you go. I looked up from sorting socket wrenches by size. Funny how equipment fails when you don't maintain it properly. Patricia nodded. She'd heard me take enough emergency calls over the years to know that defense systems were more fragile than most people realized. So what happens now? I held up a business license application I'd printed that morning. Garrison Reed Defense Systems Consulting, specializing in legacy system integration and critical infrastructure recovery. And your first potential client might be Vector Dynamics. Depends on whether they're willing to pay market rates for expertise they used to get at salary prices. The official offer came through Howard at 4:30 p.m. Emergency consulting contract, immediate system restoration required. Name your price. I let it sit in my inbox for an hour. Stanley Cooper, their corporate attorney, called at 5:45, professional, apologetic, carefully avoiding any admission of liability for yesterday's termination. Garrison, we understand there may have been some miscommunication regarding your departure from Vector. We'd like to discuss a consulting arrangement to address our current technical challenges. I let him talk for 6 minutes about mutual cooperation and professional relationships and shared interests in resolving the situation. Here's how this works, Stanley, I finally said. Garrison Reed Defense Systems charges $400 an hour for standard consulting, $600 an hour for emergency response, $800 an hour for crisis intervention, payment in advance, minimum 10-hour billing increments. Silence on the line. And Stanley, I don't work for Vector Dynamics anymore. I work for whoever pays my consulting rates and treats my expertise with professional respect. If that's you, we can do business. If not, good luck finding someone else who understands systems I designed and built from scratch over the past 18 years. More silence. I'll need to discuss this with management, he finally said. You do that? My rates go up 15% every day you wait. By Friday morning, they'd wired my retainer, and I was back in the facility. Not as Garrison the operations guy in khakis and a company polo shirt, but as Garrison Reed, consultant, carrying an invoice book and charging more per hour than I used to make in a week. The operations floor looked different when you walked through it as a vendor instead of an employee. Same equipment, same people, but now I was the expert they'd hired to solve problems they couldn't handle themselves. The Bay 12 authentication restoration took me exactly 35 minutes. I knew the system intimately because I designed every protocol and programmed every security algorithm, something that would have taken their remaining technical team weeks of troubleshooting and probably several expensive service calls to federal contractors. But I also did something else, something they should have asked me to do years ago. I documented everything. Every system, every workaround, every critical component they'd taken for granted. Every piece of institutional knowledge that had been living in my head for 2 decades. I created a comprehensive operations manual that would let them function without me, complete with diagnostic procedures, vendor contact lists, and emergency protocols for specialized repair services. Then I handed them an invoice for 60 hours of emergency consulting and walked out. 3 weeks later, Lighthouse Defense Systems completed their acquisition partnership with Vector Dynamics, but the operational delays had cost them $300,000 in contract penalties and pushed back the integration timeline by 4 months. Oliver Martinez quietly transferred to another division. Howard started treating the remaining senior staff with considerably more respect. And me, I had 6 more clients by the end of the month, companies that had heard about the Vector situation through the defense contractor network and realized they had their own Garrison Reeds keeping things running. Experienced guys who'd been there since the Reagan administration, who knew where all the critical systems were buried, who could shut down operations just by retiring without proper knowledge transfer. I wasn't getting revenge. I was getting recognition, the kind that comes with a business license, a consulting rate that reflects market value, and clients who understand the difference between managing systems and actually understanding them. Some mornings I still reach for my watch band out of habit when I'm thinking through a complex problem. But now it's not because I'm worried about systems failing on my watch. It's because I'm building something new, something that can't be eliminated by a Stanford MBA who thinks experience is just another line item to optimize. They thought they were modernizing their operation. What they actually did was teach me my own worth in the marketplace. And that education was worth more than any severance package they could have offered. The basement workshop is busier now than it ever was. Not with company emergencies that interrupted family dinners, but with projects for clients who value what I know. Companies that understand institutional knowledge isn't something you can download from the internet or outsource to the lowest bidder. And every time someone calls with a crisis that only I can solve, I remember what it felt like to see my photo posted at that reception desk like a security threat. Then I quote my current rates and watch them realize that expertise isn't disposable. It's just expensive when you wait until the last minute to appreciate it. Sometimes the most dangerous person in a company isn't the one making threats. It's the quiet guy who actually knows how everything works.